We'd like to take a minute to thank our sponsor, Cash App. Cash App has been the #1 finance app on the App Store for almost 2 years. It was also the first major peer-to-peer payments app to support Bitcoin, and it's still the fastest and easiest way to turn cash into crypto. Cash App now supports Bitcoin deposits in-app, so be sure to move your Bitcoin from whatever wallet you're using to Cash App. Don't have any to deposit? Cash App is also the most convenient way to instantly buy and sell Bitcoin. No more waiting 5 days for your ACH transfers to come through. With Cash App, you can buy Bitcoin instantly. When you're ready to take full ownership of your private keys, just use Cash App to scan an external wallet's QR code. It's really that simple. Cash App also comes with standard banking features like direct deposits and others your bank would never even consider, like Cash Card, a customizable debit card that lets you instantly save every time you use it at Lyft, Whole Foods, and places like Chick-fil-A. It's also a favorite of the Block's analyst Steven Zhang. He saves money at Chipotle every time he gets a burrito. That keeps Steven happy, that keeps the Block happy, and that keeps the crypto world informed with the best news and research in the entire market. Download Cash App today from the App Store or Google Play, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me for what is a very special episode of The Scoop. I am joined
boring
by...
episode, I think.
Well, that's true. It's going to be a little boring because we have Perianne Boring, the founder of the Chamber of Digital Commerce, joining us. It is a blockchain, cryptocurrency, advocacy organization based down in D.C., founded in 2014.
Yes.
And so the idea of the organization is to advocate on behalf of their members to members of Congress, the Senate, and other policymakers there and abroad. So you guys have been at it for a while, since 2014. Previously, you were a TV host, an adjunct professor still, right? And you've been around the block in terms of policy and advocacy work. And so I'd like to hear the story that you have in terms of how has the environment for blockchain advocacy and policy work, how has it changed since your earliest days?
Well, thanks so much for having me here, Frank.
My pleasure.
I spent a lot of time thinking about and working in the blockchain policy space. We launched the Chamber of Digital Commerce in July of 2014. So we're about 5.5 years old. The journey to set up the chamber was quite interesting. And it goes back to kind of the really early days of crypto. In 2013 really being that big year where a lot of the ideas and the foundation of the chamber was built. For those who remember 2013, I would say the positive thing that happened this year or that year is the Cyprus bailouts. That was really the first time that Bitcoin made international headlines. Cyprus was going through their negotiations with the European Union. They ended up being bailed out. But during that time, there was a lot of economic uncertainty, and the people of Cyprus started buying Bitcoin, and that caught the international news attention. And that caused a huge increase in the price of Bitcoin. That's when the Bitcoin first hit $1,300. It ended up coming back down, but it was kind of an exciting opportunity for people in this space to really see the use case of Bitcoin being put into practice. That year was also, we also had a couple scandals that year. So Silk Road being one of the big ones, as well as Mt. Gox, the failure of the Bitcoin exchange in Japan. And those were two very left black eyes on the industry. And as someone who was living and working in Washington, D.C. and in policy, to me, it was quite obvious that there was a need to have dedicated professionals who really understood the technology and the industry to go work with policymakers to help them understand what they're reading in the news, get beyond the headline of, Bitcoin, used to buy illegal drugs to
Sure.
what's actually happening. And when you have those types of things happening in the news, a lot of times policymakers feel the need to respond, and
Oh,
they
for sure.
did. And that's where the bit license came from. If you guys remember, Ben Lawsky said many times that he started the bit license process as a direct result of what had happened in Japan with Mt. Gox. So we did feel that it was really necessary that this industry had policy professionals and experts guiding regulators and the way that they're going to address and treat this technology.
To what degree do you think those, as you described them, black eyes, still leave an impression or a stain on the market in the eyes of policymakers down in Washington?
We are still in an era of fear of the unknown, anxiety of these headlines. It started with, Bitcoin being used to buy illegal drugs, to the ICO boom of, fraud and investor protection issues. And today, I think some of the bigger things of fear are more around national security issues, and we can get into those in a little bit more detail. But fear, anxiety, and a lot of skepticism. There's been a lot of hype around blockchain, and not a ton of applications and implementation of the technology at a wide scale. A lot of promises. But what ultimately is the community and the industry delivering? So we are still we still deal with a lot of fear, anxiety, and skepticism. It has evolved, and the conversations have matured in a very big way.
Well, to a degree, right? The pendulum a lot of the times will swing too far down in DC. And so are we seeing it swing back the other way? A more middle ground? Maybe Facebook might have held
I think Facebook is kind of an interesting story, because what Facebook ultimately did for the blockchain policy community, is it took the conversations to a much higher level within government. So really, before Facebook, not a lot of folks were giving these topics much time. They just felt like this was a tiny industry. We have bigger things to deal with. Not a priority for us.
Sure.
Once Facebook made their announcement, that made a lot of people sit in their chairs a lot straighter when we started talking about cryptocurrencies. That's when Treasury Secretary Mnuchin gave a press conference from the White House.
First time President Donald Trump ever tweeted about Bitcoin, I'm pretty sure.
I took those tweets and I printed them out and I put them in gold frames, and they are the crown jewels of our office now. But
well, it's pretty significant. And I think what Facebook did was it brought the conversation from, is Bitcoin good or evil? This thing, Bitcoin, which was conflated for everything under the sun in this market, to, okay, what happens when one of the largest technology firms decides it's going to create something different with money and possibly create its own version of money that could then rival the dollar? And so it goes from congressmen, congresspeople, legislators being nervous about this tool that's being used by illicit characters to, whoa, this could be something serious that can be used to, either make a lot of money or change the world from a financial inclusion perspective. And maybe not just Facebook, but China or the European Union. And it becomes something much more serious to talk about.
Yeah, the geopolitical issues are actually quite interesting. Looking around the world of what other governments are doing in this space, it's quite amazing. In the United States, the tone, again, fear, anxiety, skepticism, and the way regulators are approaching this space is very much through enforcement. So the mass majority of the conversations that are happening in DC today are about going after the bad actors and mitigating against the risk of the technology. So that's
a very defensive approach as opposed to a more proactive.
Very different than other areas of the world. And it is quite telling to see that we have major developed economies that are taking proactive steps to, one, invite innovators into their jurisdiction to build companies that are building on blockchains, and to develop the technology for government purposes. Central bank digital currency being one of those, but probably one of the more interesting topics.
The People's Bank of China has been researching and looking into
Not just researching.
a digital currency. Well, no, but researching
Building.
going back to 2014
For years.
and building
at
obviously
least 5 years. At least 5 years.
Yeah, yeah. And so this isn't something that's new, obviously, but there was a Fortune headline that I read that described, essentially we're in the final steps, describing those final steps as a wake-up call for the United States. And I think when you look at some of the folks down in Washington, there is now a newfound anxiety about China getting ahead on developing, building out, and dominating in this space. You guys have done a ton of research into what China is doing. But first, before we get into that, I'd like to know, what is the sentiment down on Capitol Hill about the sort of China versus U.S. dominance question when it comes to blockchain and digital currencies?
There's a lot of intense conversations happening right now between the United States and China broadly. Where blockchain fits into that, or if it even fits into that, was not a part of the trade deal that we just finalized. But the United States in general has a lot of issues with the Chinese government and the Chinese economy. What I think we really should be focused on is being a leader in this space. And there is absolutely no question that China is or the leader in blockchain and
Sure.
central bank digital currency. And the United States has so much to lose if we just cede its technological leadership to any other jurisdiction. And there are a number of people that understand that and recognize that. There's not enough. Look at Congress. You have 535 members of Congress, 100 senators, 435 members in the House. And
a nice civics lesson for our listeners.
For those who don't remember, you need a lot of people to actually get something done in Congress. And there are lots of people throughout Washington, D.C. that are big supporters of blockchain, but it's the process of getting something done.
But what is more powerful, Perianne? What sentiment is more powerful? The notion of we want to protect consumers and investors from a big monster like Facebook, the sort of Maxine Waters of the world, versus the folks who don't want to get beat by China. Which sentiment is stronger?
And it's not we don't want to get beat by China. It's protecting our national security.
Sure.
And that is always the trump card. And I don't mean that, no pun intended.
Sure. So what do you mean by that?
As soon as our national security comes into question.
Rather, is this being viewed as a national security issue in earnest by
I think it's
members of
very
Congress?
easy to make a national security argument out of this. I don't think the national security community is quite turned on to it yet, but I bet they will be soon.
And it's an argument that I presume you're making to the folks you're advocating to. So how do you present that argument?
Well, I think when it comes to central bank digital currency, it's quite simple. The United States has benefited greatly from the US dollar being the world reserve currency. The dollar is constantly under attack by many countries around the world. One of the ways the dollar is being attacked is through technology. And if we do not have the best technology that's underpinning our financial system and another country leapfrogs our infrastructure, that could very well jeopardize our standing on the world stage. That is a long way away. I don't think that's going to happen this year or next year, but I do think that is a possibility.
To what degree do you think members of Congress or the Senate appreciate that argument or have come to terms with it?
There's a handful that understand that.
Yeah.
A handful.
And
I'll even say we have a member that's based in New York. It's an investment company. They're making investments throughout the blockchain ecosystem. And one of their principals has been in China recently and has been spending time out there, and they have an office there. And they are so concerned that they are coming to DC, and they're going to give a private briefing to a group of members of Congress, really anybody that will come, just to share with them what they're seeing on the ground in terms of how serious China is taking this and their concerns about how serious we're not taking it. Not only that, we're discouraging innovation through our regulatory approaches. So there's a lot of people that understand how important this is, but ultimately to get things done in Washington is an incredibly complicated process. And of course, right now, all the oxygen is being sucked out on the impeachment process, which, really doesn't do much to advance any policy goals that
delusion.
Yeah.
You guys have sifted through the 94 patent filings that the Chinese government has made?
84 patents that People's Bank of China has filed over 84 patents on behalf of the Chinese government just on their central bank digital currency project.
What is the main takeaway, or what are the main takeaways of those filings? Does it paint a picture of what they're creating? How many questions are left unanswered or have been answered by some of these patents?
So we are looking at patent applications. So they're not patents yet, but sure, it does give a very strong look into what they've built and how they've designed their central bank digital currency platform. The biggest takeaway is that it's essentially fully integrated into their existing financial system. The digital currency wallets, they're going to be bound to conventional bank accounts in a dynamic manner. Digital currency circulation will be managed by the central bank system. Payments and deposits will be processed through the commercial banks. Users will be pseudo-anonymous, which means they will be anonymous on a user basis, but the government will likely have full transparency. So I would actually argue there's a large lack of transparency. And regulators will be able to track all transaction information, including the identity of the transacting parties, processing the way data will be transacted in various ways with a very high degree of regulatory oversight. So what we found actually was not quite surprising to us, that, again, this is going to be highly integrated into their banking system. The banks will play a big role in this, and a degree of privacy concerns. Mm-hmm. So out of these 84 patents, there's really 4 categories we put them into. The digital currency management, circulation, and interbank settlement is one. Digital currency wallets, processing payments and deposits, and distributed ledger transactions and technology.
Aside from the privacy concerns, is there anything that, could be considered as a positive or actually moving the needle forward in terms of blockchain innovation? Anything that's particularly striking as a development?
Well, really, the government of China's approach to blockchain, I think, is what's the biggest takeaway. And it really started even before we started looking into their central bank digital currency platform. Blockchain is part of China's 5-year plan. This is one major part of that plan, but they're integrating blockchain all across the government. We have been following what they've publicly put out in the news for several years, and we have pages and pages and pages of articles and speeches and statements. It is quite amazing, just the level of investment and development China is making into blockchain technology. I think that's a massive sign that this technology is as important as we think it is at the Chamber, to have governments taking this as serious as China is. I think there's certainly concerns about how governments could use this technology. And given, China's history of, privacy and other issues. Of course, we wouldn't want blockchain to be a way to, create, greater abuses within the system. But it certainly validates. It's a huge validation to blockchain technology if it's in the right hands. One other thing that kind of jogs my memory is their army said they made a public statement saying that they were looking at blockchain for gray warfare or for espionage. So again, getting back to those national security considerations, if there's other governments that are looking to use blockchain as a part of their defense strategy, shouldn't the U.S. government also be looking at this technology?
Yeah. How would that work? How could blockchain be used to enhance espionage?
Well, look at the 5G arguments, where these 5G instruments have backdoors in them. And China is giving away all sorts of technology to other countries around the world. And it turns out these systems are tampered with. Would they do that with other technologies? Maybe.
That's pretty interesting and a bit scary. Here in the U.S., though, we have folks who are trying to champion this idea of getting not just the private sector involved, but the public sector, the government. Former CFTC chairman Chris Giancarlo recently unveiled his digital dollar project. I think you guys are involved to some extent with that.
So Chris Giancarlo joined our board of advisors several months ago. The digital dollar project is Chris's project. It's separate of the chamber. But kind of the way we're looking at it is, one, our mission at the chamber is to promote the acceptance and use of digital assets and blockchain-based technologies. So we support blockchain innovation in the public and the private sectors, and there's certainly a role for both. The idea of having a digital dollar is something that I think is important and exciting, but is also something that's inevitable. If you look around the world, there's over 70% of all central banks today are either interested in or already pursuing central bank digital currency.
As a casual country podcaster, if you will, I might not fully appreciate the benefit of a digital dollar. What does it change for the ordinary person? How does it make the way I interact on a daily basis better? Why do we need a dollar that's digitized? Putting the national security issues that you've mentioned aside, from a practical micro level, does it benefit Frank any more than what we currently have?
I would argue that money today the dollar is already digitized in many ways. Again, I think central bank digital currency is happening. It's going to happen. And I think it's going to be important for the United States to be a leader in that.
Yeah, but like, why?
Well, who has the best technology is going to benefit from the benefits of those technology. Look at the internet. The internet was invented and created by the United States, and it was the U.S. that led the commercialization of the internet. This is what Al Gore and Bill Clinton did during that administration.
Al Gore built the internet.
He led the public policy initiatives that encouraged innovation in the United States to develop the commercialization of the internet. And look at how the U.S. has benefited from that. The largest companies in the world today are internet-related companies.
By our estimates, at least 18 countries are examining or are developing their own digital currencies, 18 central banks, that is. There could be a potential kind of war, right? Not a
money
arms
wars.
war, but a money war.
Money wars.
Going into 2020 and beyond. How do you see that playing out?
Wow, that's it could be a big question. Yeah, there was a study by the Bank of International Settlements, and they said about 70 central banks are interested or already pursuing central bank digital currency. I don't see the United States taking this lightly. I mean, they certainly don't. If you go back to that press conference from Secretary Mnuchin in response to Libra, what he was talking about in terms of cryptocurrencies, he said, take note, we take the US dollar as the world reserve currency very seriously. And they will protect that at all cost. So it's a matter of helping the government understand how important this technology is and how it is really evolving the financial and the monetary systems internationally. And there's some other kind of geopolitical things we should look at. If you remember at Jackson Hole meetings last year, where Mark Carney called for an alternative to the U.S. dollar. And he, said the system's not working, and it doesn't work for a lot of countries. So money is changing and money is evolving, and where we are today is a product of our past. And I think one of the most exciting things that Facebook has done is create an international awakening and conversation about what money is. Just 75 years ago, the world came together after World War II and created the Bretton Woods system. The Bretton Woods system was a type of gold standard. And just to kind of give you an idea of what that looked like, what everyone agreed to is that gold would be priced at $35 an ounce. The US dollar would be the world reserve currency. All other currencies would be pegged to the dollar, and they could legally demand gold from the US Treasury. And look at where we are today. There's no gold standard. Everyone is on these floating exchange rates. And the financial and the monetary system has evolved so much in just 75 years. Mm-hmm. And now we have more advanced technologies like artificial intelligence, blockchain technology, the internet. Think about how much more money is going to evolve over the next 75 years. And I think that's really exciting. But what I think is more exciting is the idea that we can actually get back to sound money. And I think a lot of people are starting to demand that with being educated on what money is and wanting something that works for everybody. So how is this going to end up? Nobody knows the answer to that, but I would bet.
But are we too far behind?
Are we too far? I don't think we're too far behind.
Been chipping away at this for 5 years.
I don't think we're too far behind. The U.S. is really good at catching up. The U.S., the American private sector and the entrepreneurial spirit of the United States is so powerful and massive. And this goes back to Chris Giancarlo's op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. He said we could put a man on the moon. Let's put the dollar in cyberspace. When we put the first man on the moon, it was partnerships with the public and the private sector that got us there, and we won the space race. I don't see why we can't win this if we're focused and we do it in a way that encourages innovation within the private sector, which is not the approach China's necessarily taking.
Well, let's then pivot over to the private sector and talk about some of the concerns and impediments that exist there. In terms of your members, what are some of the biggest impediments for them in terms of building out their respective businesses? And how are you advocating to change that?
So the federal government is an incredibly complicated organism, and we have a fragmented approach to regulation, specifically financial regulation. So the SEC, regulating securities, the CFTC, regulating derivatives. You have Treasury with their anti-money laundering statutes and the IRS with tax. Mm-hmm. And there really is no coordinated approach to regulation, oversight, and or if the government was going to build on this technology, there's no coordination there either. So what we have proposed at the Chamber is a national action plan for blockchain. We are concerned that, one, we are not leaders, and two, we have no way to get there today. We need an Office of Blockchain Technology who's responsible for understanding this technology and building a plan to make the United States a leader in this technology, which would include coordinating the regulatory oversight of companies that are innovating in this space.
So that action plan would include building out an agency that would be the sole
Not an
sort of
agency, an office.
an office. So what's the difference between an agency and an office?
Well, we're not advocating for a whole new agency, like the
Sure.
agency of blockchain. We just think there should be a
But
person.
that would sound so cool.
Well, we don't want to expand the government that much. We just think someone in government should be responsible.
Small government, I like it.
Yeah. I mean, getting a new agency, I don't think that's absolutely necessary.
So it wouldn't be on par with the CFTC, SEC, but maybe an office within one of those.
Yeah, an office within the White House would be the ideal place to put it.
Why in the White House?
Because the White House serves as a coordinator of the agencies already.
Okay.
And also the White House has executive authority. So you could see, a executive order being issued for blockchain. We modeled our national action plan for blockchain off of the internet, the plan that was done for the internet.
Okay.
And we even brought in and talked to, teams that worked on that to advise us on, how do we build a national action plan for blockchain?
Okay, walk us through what that would look like.
It's very simple. We're
Great.
calling for two things. One, we want a positive statement on behalf of the U.S. government about the importance of blockchain and encouraging the private sector to develop on blockchains in the United States of America. And then two, that office of blockchain that's responsible for building the action plan and coordinating the different agencies and departments that all have equities in this technology.
Okay, I see. And so it would sort of sit between the different regulatory bodies that have oversight over whether it's crypto companies, crypto assets, crypto derivatives, and kind of ensure.
But it's not limited to that. So there already is some degree of coordination that's happening out of FSOC, and it's just the financial services regulators. Great. But blockchain is much bigger than just financial services applications.
Of course, yeah.
There's all sorts of
healthcare and
groups that are innovating in other ways, and they need to be a part of the conversation as well.
Interesting. And so how do you get those things to come to fruition? I mean, what does that look like on the ground? Cold calling Donald Trump? What does it involve?
Sending tweets and DMs to President Trump.
Have you done that?
So we have, there's two ways we can go about it. One is, have the White House create the office or go to Congress. And there has been a number of members of the Blockchain Caucus that wrote a letter to the White House urging them to do just this.
But it would be difficult now with that Brad Sherman guy, who I think
he's just one of 535.
But he's the chair now of that subcommittee.
Yeah, but this subcommittee wouldn't be responsible. This wouldn't need to go through that subcommittee.
What would it need to go through?
So likely, potentially energy and commerce. And he's on financial services.
That's right.
Yeah.
And is that core to the chamber's plans for 2020, or
it's
is
one?
it kind
so
of like
we
a pipe dream?
It's not a pipe dream. This is a real project that
I say
we
that
think
with the
should
utmost
happen. There's a few other things that we're looking at. Of course, we want the U.S. to be the leader in blockchain technology, and encouraging the U.S. to develop a national action plan for blockchain is one. Two, we're doing a lot of work in AML. So Treasury and FinCEN has issued new guidance around the travel rules. So we have some deadlines coming up this summer. Taking that very seriously and ensuring that companies have the tools they need to be in compliance there. And then three is all things around tokens. So continuing to work on clarifying the jurisdiction of digital tokens, digital securities, laws and regulations around the digital securities market, and the taxation of digital tokens as well.
We've talked a lot about CBDCs, the government and private sector being involved in blockchain technology and working towards making that a simpler process. What about Bitcoin? Bitcoin specifically as a store of value, as a digital gold, as a new form of payment and seamless transaction. Since the chamber was founded, how has the idea of Bitcoin in Washington changed? And has that improved? I mean, is it still brought down by those black eyes that we talked about at the beginning of the show?
So I think, kind of what's been interesting is seeing the Fed's evolution of their thinking on Bitcoin. So the first time anyone at the Fed publicly talked about Bitcoin was Janet Yellen in a congressional hearing in, I think it was 2013, and Chuck Schumer, who was calling for a ban on Bitcoin in response to all the Silk Road stuff, he asked her during the hearing if she would ban Bitcoin, and her response was, "We do not have jurisdiction over Bitcoin. Next question, please." Like, she did not want to talk about it at all, and she kind of shut the question down. But it was crazy because the whole industry was all like, what does the Fed think of Bitcoin? And that's the only thing we got. And it wasn't for like several more years. She said something else later. And the next statement she made, which was in 2016, she gave a talk and she said central bankers around the world should be doing everything they can to understand blockchain technology. And so they've given a lot of talks, both Janet Yellen, as well as Governor Lael Brainerd, who's kind of deemed like the fintech governor over at the Board of Governors, on blockchain and its use within the greater financial system and kind of addressing how banks are innovating with blockchain technology. But the next statement about Bitcoin came from the new chair, Powell, and he was just asked recently about Bitcoin, and he said it's like digital gold. And that was, I think, one of the most exciting things that we had really seen come out of the Fed, where you had the chair really acknowledge one of the most important use cases for Bitcoin as a store of value. So their thinking and the way that they're even willing to talk about it publicly has changed dramatically, which I do think gives a nod to the importance of this technology.
Perianne, when something like that happens, how does the chamber respond? When you have a positive development like that, do you go out and, sort of notify everyone and try to build a message around that? What does the on the ground activism look like when something like that happens?
Well, of course, we keep a collection of all speeches and statements that come from either regulators or policymakers or policy leaders around digital assets as well as blockchain technology. And we archive some of those on our website so people can see the positive things our nation's leaders are saying about this technology. We also use it to help companies understand the regulatory landscape. So because we don't always have regulatory clarity, sometimes companies have to use speeches and statements to inform their thinking on how the old regulations will apply to this new technology. So sometimes it will make its way into legal memos and or other documents that are used to build regulatory plans or programs for companies. And then we can also use those and share them with other agencies. So different agencies may not be aware of the Fed's statements on blockchain or digital currencies. Yeah. And again, because you don't have that central coordinating function, we end up doing a lot of that coordinating ourselves, going back and forth to make sure people are aware of the landscape and are aware of the work that's being done, and ensuring that you don't have conflict of law situations arise as well.
Mm-hmm. When you think about the different avenues by which you can impact the regulatory landscape, obviously there's, through enforcement actions or through an act of Congress, maybe through executive power. What is the most effective in your view?
Well, the easiest thing is always if the agencies can issue new rules or regulations.
Something like Hinman coming out and saying, ETH is likely
so that would be
wasn't
a speech.
Security, and
so right
maybe it could
this
have
is actually
been,
getting at one of the heart of the issues, especially with the SEC, is you have speeches and statements. Those are not binding to the commission itself. So it's not actual guidance. It's not binding guidance. But that's kind of what we have today. The best thing is
why are they doing that? Why would they come out and sort of give statements and sort of convoluted statements, honestly, versus, hey, here's what this is.
Well, even sometimes they contradict, right? You may have one commissioner that says one thing and another commissioner that says something else. And if in the absence of having guidance, it's, well, which one is it?
Sure. So how do you navigate that? But honestly, what is the impetus of that? What is the reason for it?
Well, logic and reason do not always persist in policy, especially in Washington. One of the results of that is you have different bodies getting involved in the legal process. So there's a lot of companies that are not happy with the current state of regulation, and so they've gone to Congress, and now Congress is starting to introduce all sorts of legislative proposals to fix some of those challenges. And then it's also going to the courts. So there's also companies that are involved in litigation, and now the courts are going to be weighing in. So you have the courts, you have the agencies, you have Congress. It's getting quite complex.
And you have the Chamber of Digital Commerce sitting in between all of it, trying to figure out how they can advance the space. Logic and reason do not always persist in policy. Such a great quote to end the show. I firmly agree. I think it was a Ronald Reagan quote who said, or no, I think it might have been older than that. The point of bureaucracy is to improve the state of bureaucracy. But in any case, Perianne, thank you so much for joining us. We hope to have you again on soon. And safe flight back to DC.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you. That was great fun.
Very fun.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of The Scoop. We hope you tune in next time. And don't forget to subscribe and favorite wherever you listen to your podcasts. We'd like to take a minute to thank our sponsor, Cash App. Cash App has been the #1 finance app on the App Store for almost 2 years. It was also the first major peer-to-peer payments app to support Bitcoin, and it's still the fastest and easiest way to turn cash into crypto. Cash App now supports Bitcoin deposits in-app, so be sure to move your Bitcoin from whatever wallet you're using to Cash App. Don't have any to deposit? Cash App is also the most convenient way to instantly buy and sell Bitcoin. No more waiting 5 days for your ACH transfers to come through. With Cash App, you can buy Bitcoin instantly. When you're ready to take full ownership of your private keys, just use Cash App to scan an external wallet's QR code. It's really that simple. Cash App also comes with standard banking features like direct deposits and others your bank would never even consider, like Cash Card, a customizable debit card that lets you instantly save every time you use it at Lyft, Whole Foods, and places like Chick-fil-A. Download Cash App today from the App Store or Google Play, and I hope you enjoy